the Maghreb, this is North Africa, or a portion of North Africa in this case, bordering the Mediterranean, not labeled with the countries' names, so I'm not exactly did us a great job in terms of providing us a great map, but I did highlight the countries that are at play here. Book talks about at the very beginning this exoticization of North Africa, and they talk about like some movies and how it's perceived in the media. This is historically speaking, this isn't like today, but Casablanca, Morocco, North Africa here, 1942, is sort of at play in World War II. But this idea that this region is, other or backwards or nativism and these other things, this othering, and again, it sort of speaks to a control narrative. If a place is different, or if a place you perceive or prescribe as backwards, that then this American exceptionalism or Eurocentric exceptionalism comes in and saves the people by spreading your ways upon them, and that's sort of a problem for us as Westerners, Americans or Europeans or what have you, and so I don't know. This isn't some sort of tangent or something. They're getting at this in the book. They're not saying it in that way. But I'm picking up what they're putting down, I think. Can't be too sure, though. But so this idea that this area is cast as different or backwards, and certainly there's other areas where we would capture that idea, not just in this region. This isn't like the only place that this would be taking place. But I think as a region, this is the place that narrative emerges. However, its proximity to Europe has created a relationship with Europe. These were former European colonies. Italy, there in Libya, and then French Africa with the others. And so that, trading partner in terms of agriculture, tourism industry to some extent. There's like a light ski industry here that's happening, although I'm not sure the level of amount that Europeans use it, but certainly others use it. But again, this flow between others, it's created jobs. Across the Strait of Gibraltar, that tiny little narrow way that, remember, that cycles the Mediterranean water in and out 80 years, separates Morocco from Spain, Africa, and Europe. So it's quite similar. And we've had, throughout human history, we've had conquests coming back and forth from each other into the Roman Empire and into Carthage, down into Africa, and the Moors up into Spain, and then chased back down. And so there's, surrounding religion usually, but there was an exchange of people far beyond European colonization, but actually hundreds of years before that as well. I'm going to speak specifically about Libya for a moment. This one right here. Muammar Gaddafi. He dies in 2011 after ruling for 42 years. You'll see a picture of him in a moment, know what in the world to expect. We'll talk about him when we see his picture, and we'll talk about him in just a second. But we're going to set that up. Muammar Gaddafi. The Berbers. These are the indigenous peoples of North Africa, and they're specifically distinct. Some Arab policy in this area has created them to almost encourage them to assimilate into the culture and to sort of give up their ways. But actually, in recent times, they've actually gained notoriety, and their languages are developed, distinguished as national languages as well. And so they sort of gained more distinction and progress for the indigenous Berber people in this region compared to how it was some time ago. So now here we go. There's northern Algeria. This is just to sort of show a particular city. This is no particular city, or it is a particular city. It's just one of no particular importance to me, maybe to somebody, I'm sure. But just to sort of demonstrate, again, what we're looking at when we see the landscape integrated with human development. Tunis, Tunisia, again to capture the types of cityscapes that are occurring in these types of regions. Here we have a Berber, an indigenous person of North Africa. Again, sort of important feature in this particular region. And then Muammar Gaddafi, kind of a fancy dresser. He'd be sort of noted for his crazy talks at the UN and such. But in the Arab Spring, he's forced from power. They eventually capture him and they kill him. United States was involved to some extent. But this is a guy that was like, Americans in terms of from the government were not thrilled with this guy for a long time. There's like a situation where we went after him and tried to get him out of there for decades. So not a fan of, the United States government was not a fan of his from early on. And so he ruled for 42 years and was out of power in 2011. So he's one of those people that were thrown from power, but then he was actually killed for it. But we'll talk about those that are removed from power. Now the Nile, this is the smallest region we've ever talked about, probably. No, we had Mexico as a sub-region all by itself. But anyways, small sub-region, 2 countries, Egypt and Sudan, the 2 countries where the Nile River flows. Egypt has a population of approximately 96 million people, getting ready to join that 100 million population club. They rely on the Nile River for agriculture. Obviously, there's a lot more to say about Egypt, but we just don't really want to at the moment because we don't have the time. We're reading about it, right? So I don't have to just tell you this. I just kind of convey a couple other facts, and you're reading all about Egypt in the book, and certainly free to use extra resources as well. Hosni Mubarak loses power in 2013, kind of this Arab Spring movement again. He led since 1981 to 2013. So again, another guy, a lot of decades in power. He resigns. He's actually still alive. He's like 89 years old. He's still alive, but certainly not in power anymore. In 2013, the Muslim Brotherhood takes over, and then they go from there, politically speaking, after the Arab Spring. Sudan has had several civil wars due to varying religious and cultural practices in the country. South Sudan leaves. Well, what am I talking about? If you remember, I told you to remember what on that agricultural production map. We have Sudan, and then all of a sudden there's this new line through it. Well, that new line is actually not that new. It's from 2011. Becomes the newest country in the world. South Sudan becomes its own independent country by breaking away from that of the Sudan. This was all of the Sudan. Now we have South Sudan, which is in the sub-Saharan Africa section. And then we have Sudan here. And when that line was there, that line almost is this new country's border. And what that means is because there were some clear differences that were taking place in the country by so we have a lot of Muslim, fairer-skinned, nomadic cattle ranchers or cattle herders, I won't go as far as say ranchers, that were living mostly in the northern part of the Sudan. To the south, you have people that are mainly taking place in that more settled agriculture because the climate's a little different. They were mostly black in terms of their race, and they were mostly Christian or had an indigenous religion. And so there's stark differences in race, in employment / economic status, and then in religion. And when you have, it's bad enough when there's sort of one difference there to clash with, but there was 3. And so they continually had disruptions between them. There's a province here, Darfur province. We've had several times where there's been, genocide was there, and the UN had to be involved, and other actors, and again, the unrest there was quite profound. It eventually separates, becomes Sudan and South Sudan. Suez Canal is part of up there in Egypt, built in the mid to late 1800s for ships to come through from the Mediterranean through the Red Sea and bypass that of Africa. Cairo, Egypt, as I mentioned, Cairo and Alexandria on or near the Nile, 19 million people in the greater area, huge primate city of that of Egypt, capital as well. Darfur, Sudan, we just talked about that. Omar al-Bashir, Sudan, first head of state to ever be indicted in the World Court, in the International World Court in The Hague, in the Netherlands. So, bummer, but good. Justice was served. Arabian Peninsula, okay, led by sheiks historically, and that term has varied. That was an older term that was sort of a political structure, if you will. And now it's sort of just a term that's used for somebody in a leadership position in sort of modern lingo. But the region is rapidly modernizing due to its extreme wealth from oil reserves. And we'll talk about that in a moment on the pictures. But then on a different note, Yemen has an ongoing conflict beginning in 2012, Arab Springtime. This is Yemen, and that's Oman. People mix them up all the time. I don't know why I see that, but nobody can keep it straight. I always keep it straight, but you read right to left, and yo. I don't know why, but that's how I keep it straight. Maybe that was terrible advice, but maybe it wasn't. Okay, pilgrimage to Mecca. Already talked about that, but Sunnis and Shiites make this pilgrimage perhaps once in their life to Mecca in Saudi Arabia. They do this, and this pilgrimage. If you remember, Sunnis majority, Shiites minority in terms of numbers worldwide for Muslim religion. Important to remember. Conflict in Yemen, again, happening. The Saudis are involved. Yemen has fallen into the status of a failed state because of this. They removed a guy that was in power for like 30 years, but in fact, what they got was kind of worse because they got chaos, somewhat anarchy. Burj Khalifa, world's tallest building, beats Taipei, 101 or whatever its building name was. Not important because it's not in our region yet. Outside, but becomes world's tallest building, I think around 2008. There in Dubai, in the United Arab Emirates. And Qatar will host the 2022 FIFA World Cup. We know what that does to places. When World Cup was hosted in South Africa, and it was in Sochi, and in Brazil, and those were in BRICS countries. Now this isn't a BRICS country, but you can see what it does. It tries to showcase your country, try to increase the word, what's going on there, and increase it for tourism and interest purposes. Eastern Mediterranean. Okay, strategically located, because it's on the Mediterranean, pretty decent climate compared to the rest of the regions specifically, but unstable due to religious and other differences. Well, we talked about that enough. I don't think we need to go any further. 3 monotheistic religions, all there. There's some other things going on too. There's Hezbollah, a terrorist organization in Lebanon that's anti-Israeli. So we got that to deal with as well. But otherwise, so there are some differences going on. The Syrian civil war, the conflict there, and obviously that problem happening between Israel and Palestine that's been happening for like 60 years. So a lot of things happening there. It's certainly not just religion, but a lot of other things going on as well. There's your cue to watch the Syrian Civil War video, 2011 and onward. Tons of people dying. It's actually a tragedy, but pay attention to it so we can see what's going on. Talked about Israel and Palestine. Kobani, Syria. Again, just to show the level of destruction. I can't really show it just like a picture or two, but again, just sort of capturing the Syrian civil war and the devastation that is taking place there. Jerusalem again, major city in terms of religion and noteworthiness to the country of Israel and others, and the Hezbollah troops, which I mentioned, terrorist organization out of Lebanon. The northeast final subregion. Turkey was once the core of the Ottoman Empire. We talked about the empires back when we were talking sort of more about Europe, but we talked about the Roman Empire, the Greek Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and the Ottoman Empire, which stretched up into part of Europe. And Turkey was sort of the core, the epicenter of the Ottoman Empire. Turkey, with the city of Istanbul, not the capital. Capital is Ankara in the center of the country, but this piece that sort of is on more of the European continent, if you will, near Bulgaria and Greece there, that sort of part is what we would consider like European Turkey, with the city of Istanbul. And that's, again, where sort of Turkey has this sort of shared battle between that of Asia and that of Europe. just like Russia would, that one that divides the two continents. So that's Turkey. They have kind of an authoritarian ruler there. They tried to get him out of there, and he just jailed a bunch of people, like thousands of people, and they got released and stuff. But again, not a great situation politically there right now at the moment. Iran population, 80 million people. Remember, Shia Islam, that's the global minority, but a majority in Iran. If you remember Revolution 1979, the Islamic Revolution, sort of a little bit more of a progressive society before that takes place. There was the Shah. He was a friend of the West. He tried to westernize things, arguably too quickly, and wasn't all great, by no means. And so people, revolution takes place. Islamic fundamentalists take over. They have a leader, and then they also instituted this position of a supreme leader, Grand Khomeini, and so Grand Ayatollah. I'm sorry, and so Khomeini is the Grand Ayatollah. He's the supreme leader. They haven't had too many. This is a lifetime appointment, so these are usually pretty old guys. A cleric, a religious person, and then they have their sort of leader in day-to-day operations like you would a president. But ongoing protests there with nuclear armament and things. If Iran nuclear deal that we've heard about through the election and things that involve the United States and Iran. But that revolution that took place in '79 that we sort of got to see through an animation, but through Persepolis, and see how that how that story was unfolded there. Decades of trouble for Iraq. We talked about Iraq before, and then a segue us to Saddam Hussein. He was in power from 1979 to 2003. 2006, he's killed, execution by hanging. Iranian Revolution, we had just talked about that. There you see the capital city of Tehran there, and there's that sort of European Turkey right there with Istanbul. So that wraps it up. That's North Africa and Southwest Asia.